This book scared me, okay? I gotta be real honest. It scared me, it's fascinating. I don't want to scare people away, but there was a lot of revelatory things in here. Now, I have some skepticism, and I understand that technology, a lot of times, these tech apps, they're tracking me. They have a lot of data. I understand the government, maybe not always above board, but you found a way to put these two together, like a ham and cheese sandwich of paranoia. And tell me, I feel like a lot of this what started to surprise me starts here at these digital advertising exchanges, right? Start with me there. What do I need to understand about a digital advertising exchange?
Sure. So that banner ad that you see every time you load an app or a website, that's tracking you in more ways than one.
Okay.
Every time you load something like that and you see a little display ad, you're actually passing a ton of information back to these technology companies that are vacuuming it up, they're collecting it, they're trying to build profiles of you, and there are thousands of them that are all getting this data every time you load an app. And some of those entities are actually saving that data, they're brokering it, it's become a big business model, so they're selling it to other entities. So whenever you, give a weather app permission to know your location is actually being passed back to this mind-numbingly complex system of digital advertising, and there are thousands of parties there that can collect it, even if they're not the one that serves you the ad. And so a lot of data is saved and resold.
And so what you're telling me here is, well, some of that I assume, right? I open up that weather app, oh, it knows it's cold here, it's gonna sell me a parka, right? It also knows that I'm cheap, so it's gonna have to be a cheap parka, right? These are what these phones do.
Yes.
But you talk about, the government has decided, well, it, we can use this too, right? I'm okay with Nike pouncing on me and selling me these shoes for my gout-riddled feet. Perhaps I share too much, they already know. But how is the government getting in on this action?
Sure. So there's a lot of ways government gets data from things like digital advertisers. So sometimes they just buy it from these data brokers that sit there and they slurp it all up and they sell it. Sometimes government contractors set up things that look like marketing companies, and they get access to these ad networks, and they provide the data to the government. Sometimes governments, hack into these systems. So there's lots and lots of ways for governments to get data off of these networks, and often they just simply need to open their wallets and buy it.
Is this legal?
This is by and large considered legal because when the government acts as a buyer in a consumer market, lawyers have tended to take the position that you've lost the reasonable expectation of privacy that's core to your Fourth Amendment rights, right? Like, you've already told something like a digital advertiser or a bank or some other company something about yourself or the information that you're generating, so what privacy interest do you have in it? And if it's available for sale and the government's buying it just like any other buyer, most lawyers have blessed these kind of programs.
You go into apps like Grindr, and initially as... I'm in the book. That's no judgment. No judgment. In the book, you talk about apps like Grindr,
yes,
right? And how that data was suddenly being used for nefarious purposes. And you even talk about a Catholic blog, essentially, that perches information on a bishop and then publishes that and outs that bishop and gets that bishop fired, right? Is that some of the, what are some of the examples of this information being used for nefarious purposes?
Yeah, so with that Grindr example, it's not that Grindr is out there selling its users' data. It's that Grindr wants to serve ads to its users like many other apps. But when you serve ads, you are exposing all of your users to these thousands of advertisers, these entities that can collect this information. And again, some of them sell it. And some of them sell it to people that they don't look very closely at. And so in this instance, there were a bunch of Catholic journalists who had received tips from people who had acquired this data through purchasing it. And they were going around and they were saying something like, we have a lead on some priests that might be using Grindr and violating their vows. And one of those journalists bid on it and published a story about this, and this Catholic official had to resign. And this is true of not just Grindr, but basically any app where we share our location and that wants to serve us banner advertising. We're sharing a ton of data with them, and whoever's out there and is, has access to it can buy it.
Now, You mentioned something here at the end of the book, talking about the recent Dobbs decision, right? And right now, access to abortion services is limited in some states. People are crossing state lines to get that. Is this the type of thing that you see as a harbinger for a tactic or a tool for states to purchase through advertisers, ways in which to track people potentially committing what they see as a crime?
Yeah, it's certainly possible that state governments who have decided that they want to make abortion unlawful and want to even take the step of potentially, seeing what residents travel out of state, the sheer amount of data that's sloshing around about all of us all the time is a target for states like that. And it's entirely possible that states could either purchase data or, if they're going to go down the route of criminalizing traveling out of state for abortion, they could simply subpoena it or go to court for it. And so it really does make it hard to move around the world anonymously these days, just because of all the data that we all generate every day.
You talk about the privilege of disappearing. And you also talk, I guess I hear this and I understand it and it scares me, but I also, on the other hand, think can we avoid this? Is this sort of the world we are in right now? As a journalist, as an investigative journalist, there's an element of secrecy, at least assumed with some of the conversations you have or what have you. In the book, you talk about you even went to go purchase a car. And somebody who's researching a book about the ways in which people can weaponize data on you, purchasing a car that you already see ways in which that ties you to location. How do you go about a process of purchasing that and be an investigative journalist who cares about secrecy?
Well, the poor Hyundai dealership that I walked into had no idea what they were getting into.
They're like, oh, great, another investigative journalist on data brokerage. God damn it!
They didn't even know how to answer the questions I was asking. So, I eventually made them go get a car from 2 states over that didn't even have the little cell chip that can transmit the data.
Because because you walk in there, I just think it's a car, but you're talking about there's cell chips, essentially like the Bluetooth that's in the car, and also in the tires, right?
Yes. So one thing people don't realize, but your tires actually are broadcasting a little radio signal constantly, and it's there to tell the car's central computer that your tire pressure is low. Perfectly reasonable safety mechanism, but clever governments have figured out, hey, a tire is a proxy for a car. That tire is screaming a unique identifier all the time. If we put a little sensor here, a little sensor there, a little sensor under a bridge, a little sensor in a tunnel, we can track cars around based on their car tires. And car companies don't seem to realize that this is a vector for tracking and have never done anything to make these vehicles or make these systems work better for privacy.
And they can sell that information to insurance companies?
Yep. So there's a big controversy now about selling car data to insurance companies. So car companies like GM were doing that, and they recently said they were stopping selling it to data brokers that were selling it to insurance companies for public safety purposes. It seems like governments are putting up these little sensors that might be able to track either your license plate reader or your car tires or both, or all sorts of other things that I don't even know about yet. But yes, this is entirely possible.
So you have to take extra steps as an investigative journalist to keep this anonymity.
Yeah, and there are things that ordinary people can do, right? You can be a little bit more careful with the permissions on your phone. Not every game needs access to your 24/7 location, your photo roll, and all this data about you, right? It'll work just fine without it. Every time you open the Uber app, you don't need to let it have your geolocation. You just type the address that you're at. So you can do small things to reclaim privacy and make sure that, parties that don't need your data don't get it.
Now, as I read this, I thought about secrecy, about ways in which you can take small steps. And then I saw your acknowledgments. And in your acknowledgments, you were very grateful to people who helped you write this book. And you said the first words of this book were written on an Amtrak train between D.C. and New York. A full chapter outline was completed at a rented farmhouse in Reisterstown, Maryland in January 2022. The final few weeks of writing this first draft were spent in New York City at the Work Heights on Franklin Avenue. This is remarkably specific for someone who's worried about location.
Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect. Well, it's a good read. It scared the bejesus out of me. I appreciate it. Means of Control is available now. Byron Tau.